4:12 a.m., off Venezuela's northern coast. Inside a dim command center, a red status line flips from monitor to counterstrike posture. Operators stop speaking. A coastal radar has just painted multiple tracks holding a steady line. Close enough to matter, far enough to deny intent. On the map, U.S. positions remain silent. No radar lock, no warning tone, no missiles in the air. Orders move fast anyway. Fighter crews are told to stand by. Air defense units shift modes. Electronic warfare teams prepare to disrupt without crossing the line. Nothing has been fired, yet every decision in the next minutes could turn restraint into retaliation. If modern conflict is decided before the first shot, who actually controls this moment? Venezuela's northern coastline has always been more than a geographic boundary. It is a strategic threshold where the Caribbean Sea narrows into vital shipping lanes, where energy routes intersect with U.S. forward presence, and where political pressure has repeatedly translated into military signaling. For Caracas, the coastline is not just territory to defend, it is the last buffer against external leverage. For Washington, the same waters represent freedom of navigation, intelligence collection, and crisis visibility in a region long considered within its strategic horizon. This tension did not emerge overnight. Years of sanctions, diplomatic breakdowns, and mutual accusations hardened perceptions on both sides. Venezuela invested selectively not to match U.S. power ship for ship or aircraft for aircraft, but to raise the cost of approach. Mobile surface-to-air missile units, modernized fighter squadrons, and coastal surveillance networks were designed around one goal: deterrence through uncertainty. The message was simple: any approach would be seen tracked and contested, even if not immediately engaged. The United States, meanwhile, refined a different approach: persistent presence without provocation. ISR aircraft flying predictable profiles. Naval patrols operating under strict rules of engagement. The intent was visibility, not confrontation. Maintaining awareness while avoiding actions that could be framed as escalation. Silence became a tool. Radar stayed cold. Fire control systems remained inactive. The absence of signals was meant to project confidence and restraint. But strategic restraint cuts both ways. When one side withholds signals, the other must decide whether silence means caution or preparation. For Venezuelan commanders, U.S. quiet often reads as ambiguity, and ambiguity is dangerous. History has taught them that waiting for clarity can mean losing initiative. That is why doctrines emphasize readiness over reaction, posture over provocation. This is the environment in which the counterstrike order was issued. Not as a declaration of attack, but as a shift in balance from observation to conditional response. A reminder that deterrence is not passive. It is maintained through visible readiness and disciplined control. The question is not why tensions exist here. The question is how long both sides can operate inches from escalation, relying on judgment instead of firepower. Preparation began hours before the order was spoken aloud. Along the coastline, surveillance teams had already been rotating through extended shifts, eyes fixed on screens that rarely stayed quiet for long. Coastal radar stations tracked surface movement in kilometers and air contacts in feet, while passive sensors listened, collecting emissions without revealing their own presence. Every contact was logged, tagged, and compared against routine patterns. Tonight felt different, not because of volume, but because of precision. The tracks were clean, stable, deliberate. Inside the operations room, intelligence officers layered feeds. Satellite passes from earlier in the night confirmed U.S. naval positioning. Signals teams noted disciplined emissions control, no active targeting radars, no fire control signatures. That silence triggered concern rather than comfort. Silence meant intent was being managed, not absent. One analyst quietly flagged the pattern: ISR behavior consistent with proximity mapping, not transit. On the flight line, fighter crews were already awake, not scrambling, waiting. Pilots reviewed engagement envelopes and fuel states, rehearsing intercept geometry without being told to move. A senior controller reminded them of the rule that mattered most: hold the line, do not cross it. The mission was presence, not pursuit. Electronic warfare teams prepared their own tools. Jamming profiles were preloaded but kept cold, designed to degrade situational awareness without blinding it. The objective was control, not chaos. In this phase, disruption was a signal, not a weapon. Across the water, U.S. operators were doing much the same. ISR crews monitored Venezuelan radar behavior, noting frequency shifts and brief activations. Analysts debated whether the changes indicated calibration or escalation. Commanders chose caution. Courses were adjusted by small margins. Altitude shifted just enough to test response without provoking it. This was intelligence work at its most fragile. No single data point meant anything alone. Meaning emerged only through patterns, timing, and restraint. A misread here would not just cause embarrassment, it could trigger a chain reaction neither side truly wanted. As dawn approached, both command structures were fully engaged, poised between confidence and doubt. The battlefield had not ignited, but it was fully formed, mapped, measured, and mentally rehearsed by everyone involved. At this stage, preparation itself became the message. And the question hanging in the air was simple. When readiness becomes visible, does it stabilize the situation or push it closer to the edge? The shift happened without ceremony. No alarms, no raised voices. A single command line updated across multiple consoles at once, Counterstrike posture active. For Venezuelan commanders, this was not an order to fire. It was an order to be ready to fire faster than the other side could react. From the air defense sector, mobile SAM units adjusted positions by kilometers, staying inside pre-surveyed corridors that balanced coverage with concealment. Radar operators briefly powered up, painted the airspace, then went dark again. Each activation lasted seconds, long enough to confirm tracks, short enough to avoid becoming targets. The intent was psychological as much as tactical. We see you and we can choose when to be seen. On the coast, 2 fighter jets rolled from readiness shelters to the edge of the apron. Engines stayed idle. Pilots ran checks in silence, helmet visors down, breathing slow. They were not intercepting yet. They were signaling availability. Fuel loads were calculated for short-duration presence, not pursuit, another line not to be crossed unless ordered. Across the water, U.S. systems reacted immediately, even though no weapons had moved. ISR operators noted the brief radar flashes and classified them as fire control capable but non-committal. That distinction mattered. It meant the other side was shaping behavior, not initiating combat. Commanders ordered subtle adjustments. A patrol aircraft altered its orbit by a few nautical miles. A surface vessel shifted heading just enough to change the geometry of any potential engagement. Then came the unexpected element. A new contact appeared briefly on Venezuelan displays, fast, clean, and fleeting. For seconds, it looked like an approach profile that would justify escalation. Controllers froze. Analysts rechecked inputs. The contact vanished as quickly as it appeared. No radar lock followed, no secondary confirmation emerged. It was a decoy. Whether intentional or incidental mattered less than its effect. The appearance tested reaction thresholds on both sides. Venezuelan command resisted the impulse to escalate. No missiles were readied, no intercept order was given. Instead, electronic warfare teams initiated a limited disruption burst, localized, temporary, deniable. Enough to signal displeasure, not enough to force a response. U.S. crews felt it immediately. Displays flickered. Data latency increased. Not blindness, friction. Exactly the kind designed to say we can complicate this whenever we choose. The response was restraint. No counterjamming. No public acknowledgement. The patrol adjusted again, widening distance while maintaining presence. For several tense minutes, the situation balanced on discipline alone. Both sides had options that would have escalated the encounter within seconds. Neither took them. The counterstrike order remained active, but unused. Its power derived from the fact that it did not need to be executed to change behavior. And that was the moment when everything shifted. The U.S. positions gradually eased outward, not retreating, but conceding space. Venezuelan units held their posture, then slowly de-escalated readiness levels. Engines shut down, radars stayed cold. The crisis did not end with a bang, but with a quiet redefinition of boundaries. Nothing was destroyed, no shots were fired, yet both sides walked away knowing something important had happened. If a counterstrike can succeed without being launched, where does real control in modern warfare actually reside? Defensive reactions unfolded almost entirely through posture, not firepower. On the Venezuelan side, air defense crews remained locked in a heightened state of readiness, but launch authority was deliberately held back. Missile systems stayed aligned, guidance parameters preloaded, yet safety interlocks were never removed. This was defense by presence, forcing the other side to calculate risk without offering a trigger. Commanders emphasized discipline. Radar emissions were minimized. Communications were kept short and coded. The objective was to deny the United States a justification to escalate while still making one fact unmistakable: any aggressive move would be met immediately. In this phase, restraint was not weakness, it was control. U.S. forces mirrored that calculation. Rather than challenge the posture directly, commanders adjusted geometry. Aircraft increased lateral separation. Naval elements altered speed and heading, breaking engagement envelopes without announcing withdrawal. Defensive systems remained active but silent, avoiding any signal that could be misread as preparation to strike. This mutual restraint was not accidental. It reflected doctrine shaped by past close calls where misinterpretation, not intent, nearly triggered conflict. Both sides understood that once defensive systems fully activate, decision windows collapse from minutes to seconds. Keeping those systems on standby preserved time, and time preserved options. The encounter ended not because one side blinked, but because both recognized the same danger: escalation without gain. Defensive response in this case meant absorbing pressure without reacting impulsively, and that leaves a harder question behind when defense succeeds by doing nothing. How close did both sides come to doing too much? The mechanics behind this encounter reveal why modern deterrence often works best when weapons remain unused. Venezuela's layered air defense concept is built around creating uncertainty rather than guaranteeing interception. Mobile SAM systems capable of engaging targets at varying altitudes are positioned to force approaching aircraft and vessels into constant recalculation. The key is not coverage alone, but ambiguity. The opponent never knows which sensor is active, which launcher is live, or how quickly engagement authority can be granted. Radar behavior played a decisive role. Brief activations followed by immediate shutdowns prevented reliable targeting while still confirming track quality. This tactic limits exposure to anti-radiation weapons and complicates intelligence analysis. From the opposing perspective, each radar flash raises a question: was that a routine scan or the final step before launch? That uncertainty shapes movement more effectively than continuous illumination ever could. Electronic warfare added another layer. The localized disruption experienced by U.S. systems was not intended to blind sensors, but to introduce friction. Slight delays, degraded clarity, increased workload. In military terms, friction multiplies risk. A pilot or commander forced to question data quality becomes more conservative, widening margins and slowing tempo. That is precisely the effect sought here. On the U.S. side, emission control and geometry management were equally deliberate. By keeping fire control radars cold and adjusting distance rather than heading straight in or out, commanders avoided signaling hostile intent. Defensive systems stayed ready but silent. This preserved escalation control while still protecting forces if the situation deteriorated. Cost asymmetry underpins all of this. Maintaining readiness fuel personnel system wear costs far less than launching interceptors or missiles that may achieve nothing beyond political fallout. In that sense, deterrence becomes an economic strategy as much as a tactical one. What this encounter demonstrates is a shift in how power is exercised. Control is achieved not by destroying the opponent's capability, but by shaping their decisions. The side that best manages perception, timing, and restraint can alter outcomes without crossing legal or political thresholds. And that raises an uncomfortable thought: if wars are increasingly decided in these silent margins, how often do such confrontations pass unnoticed until one finally goes wrong? In the hours that followed, nothing appeared to change on the surface. Patrol routes resumed, official statements stayed vague, no press briefings acknowledged a confrontation, yet beneath that calm operational behavior quietly shifted on both sides. U.S. planners adjusted proximity thresholds. Flight paths that once hugged the edge of contested airspace widened by measurable margins. Naval patrol timing became less predictable. The goal was not withdrawal, but risk management, reducing the chance that another brief radar flash or ambiguous signal could compress decision time even further. Presence continued, but with sharper respect for how quickly posture alone could reshape the encounter. For Venezuela, the outcome reinforced a core lesson: credible. Readiness can influence a stronger adversary without firing a shot. The counterstrike posture validated years of investment in mobile defenses, electronic warfare, and command discipline. More importantly, it strengthened internal confidence. Deterrence was no longer theoretical. It had been tested and it had worked. Regionally, the incident carried wider implications. Allies and neighbors watched carefully, not for explosions, but for behavior. The message was subtle yet powerful: escalation is no longer defined by missiles in the air, but by thresholds crossed in perception and intent. A moment of restraint can carry as much strategic weight as a visible strike. Politically, this kind of encounter complicates diplomacy. Nothing concrete happened yet, something undeniably did. That ambiguity makes it harder to de-escalate through traditional channels because there is no single action to condemn or defend. Instead, there is only a shared understanding that lines exist even if they remain officially unspoken. The danger, of course, is repetition. Each silent standoff conditions commanders to push a little further next time. Each successful restraint invites the question of how much more pressure can be applied without consequence. If deterrence now operates in these narrow, invisible margins, how many times can judgment hold before one misread signal tips the balance? This encounter never produced wreckage casualties or a headline announcing open conflict. Yet it stands as a clear example of how modern warfare increasingly unfolds not through destruction, but through decision-making under pressure. A single command to shift into counterstrike posture altered behavior on both sides, reshaped operational boundaries, and achieved its objective without a launch sequence ever being completed. What mattered most was not hardware but discipline. Radar operators who knew when to turn systems off, pilots who held position instead of chasing advantage, commanders who understood that restraint at the right moment can project strength more effectively than aggression. In this case, control of escalation proved more valuable than the ability to escalate. The lesson is uncomfortable for traditional thinking. Power is no longer measured solely by how much force can be delivered, but by how precisely it can be withheld. Deterrence today lives in timing perception and credibility. The side that convinces the other it could strike without needing to often dictates the outcome. For observers, these moments rarely register. There's no footage of explosions, no dramatic damage assessments. Yet for the people inside those command centers, the stakes are absolute. A misjudged radar pulse, a delayed order, a pilot misreading intent. Any one of these could have turned restraint into catastrophe within seconds. As such, silent confrontations become more frequent, the margin for error shrinks. The question is no longer whether nations can fight, but whether they can consistently choose not to even when fully prepared to do so. In an era where wars may be decided before the first shot, understanding these unseen battles matters more than ever. Bye for now.